Beloveds, this space is a church for Daniel. It's an autism-friendly virtual oasis for your spirit. I hope we find a new way to do church together, a way that prioritizes people over traditions, a way that celebrates diversity and creativity, and a way that doesn't make anyone smaller and quieter. It's a church for my own son, Daniel. It's a church for everyone, and it's a church for you. So friends, welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is the very first ever episode of my podcast, A Church for Daniel. For this first episode, I wanted to share with y'all an origin story for how this project came about. I've been in pastoral ministry for 13 years. I was 25, going on 26, when I was appointed to my first two little rural churches. Then, 2 years after I started serving those two churches, I became a mom. My oldest child is named Daniel James, and this ministry is named for him. In churches like the two that I was serving at the time, and all of the ones that I've served since, we've complained for decades about decline in attendance, aging congregations, dwindling Sunday school classes, and in general, the lack of kids and, in air quotes, young families. We really want to try to snare in those young families more than anything. Now, I was 25 when I started these first two churches, and I intuitively understood a lot of that decline because my own friends were the ones who weren't going to church, despite being one of the rare young people who actually did go to church and then became clergy. But then when I became a mom, the reality of why more folks don't bring their kids to church smacked me over the head like a 2x4. We had a very difficult, very traumatic birth, but still, for all me and my husband Sean knew, Daniel was just a regular baby. But still, I found quickly that it takes extraordinary effort in the first thing in the morning on a Sunday to get a baby up, dressed, fed, changed again because they just wrecked the first outfit, to get the diaper bag packed, to load the car seat, and then arrive at church to be exhausted, running late, in need of way more space in all senses of the word, only for your baby to immediately barf on the carpet and start crying in the middle of the sermon. And y'all, it's my sermon the baby's crying in the middle of. It's a marathon to bring your kids really anywhere, but especially to a place like church, a place where yours are likely to be the only children there, a place where all the attention will be on you because you just brought in the only children and they are the most attention-seeking and the most attention-getting people in the room, bar none. And all of the disruptions are going to pretty much automatically be your fault because you're the one who brought the little tiny noisemakers in with you. And yet, for how many little old ladies really preached otherwise in their words about how much they love babies, finding willing helpers proved challenging. And then, of course, we found out little by little along the way that Daniel was not just a regular baby. His behaviors became clear as day long before he eventually got his autism diagnosis, which was at the age of 4. He could not tolerate being separated from me. And to this day, now that he's 11 years old, he still can't. At a young age, he had very limited language. And the frustration from having so little language caused many meltdowns. It also meant that folks at church struggled to bond with Daniel. They really, really wanted to, but he couldn't talk to them. And he clung to me like I was covered in glue. Among his secondary diagnoses are ADHD, meaning that his mind is always coming up with new things that he wants to try out, and hyperkinesis, its own diagnosis, which literally just means moves a lot. This translated into a little guy in your church sanctuary who never stopped walking around, who couldn't stay contained to any one space, not one pew, not the nursery, not anywhere, and who was always looking for me while I was in the middle of doing work, who never stopped playing with the sounds that his voice could make, and who wanted to touch, engage with, and explore everything. And well, traditional minded people at churches, they have a lot of items in the sanctuary that they believe no one should ever touch. And we discovered that quickly. It's very important to understand while you're listening to this that autism is not a continuum, a straight line from less autism to more autism. It's a three-dimensional reality where no two autistic folks have the same profile, the same behaviors, the same strengths, or the same support needs. So you could be listening to this and thinking, well, hey, I'm autistic too, but I'm not like Daniel. And fam, welcome. Conversely, you could be listening to this and thinking, well, hey, I don't think I'm autistic, but honestly, Daniel kind of sounds like me. I also hate sitting still at church, and I too kind of want to get up and explore and touch stuff. And fam, welcome. Despite being the pastor's kid, it wasn't long before folks lost their patience with Daniel. And then some of the nastiness started. Some folks asked me not to bring him to church events anymore. He was a disabled toddler, but to folks all along this journey, starting from way back when Daniel first started showing those early symptoms to now when he's an autistic preteen, folks have looked at Daniel not as part of the church family, not as someone without whom this family is incomplete, but as a little intruder on your turf. He has stood accused time and time again of ruining worship services, of making the ministries of the church unabsorbable, of making folks feel like they just don't want to come here anymore. And please do understand while you listen to this, especially if you know me personally and you know some of the churches I've served, that this isn't a finger pointing. This isn't about any one person or any group of people or any one congregation, because this dynamic I'm explaining to you is very much a church with a capital C, whole body of Christ dynamic. Every single person that I have engaged with the collar on has been a part of this dynamic. This is how church folks have consistently been with Daniel across the entire board. So this is an everyone problem. Anecdotally, one time, I went to a special gathering with Daniel at a neighboring church, one where I wasn't the pastor, but where I was friends with the pastors, and it was on a Saturday. And they were delivering a presentation about how to make the church, again, big C, the whole body, not just their congregation, more inclusive. And I had Daniel sitting in a pew with me, and the ushers objected to Daniel being there because they thought he was too noisy, so much that they made us leave. We had to go outside. So here Daniel and I were, at a special event about how to make the church inclusive of all people, and we were watching the live stream of this presentation on my phone from the parking lot because we weren't welcome inside. That was a day of very, very harsh irony, and not the last one, nor the first. That was one exceptionally low point. Another low point came just about 2 years later, when I left the church that I had been serving for 4 years in the town that I lived in, because folks were so intolerant of Daniel that there was simply no way left for us to all grow together. And I'm still recovering from that one, both personally, as just a child of God and a mother, and professionally, as an ordained minister. I may never again be the Pastor Natalie that I was before that experience. This person who was rooted in her identity and her potential of where I thought the church could go, the big things that I believe the church was capable of. The dangerous liberal lady preacher, if you've listened to the first podcast that I ever made, who wanted to set the church ablaze as change makers and little badasses in the world. I learned some deeply devastating hard truths. But since then, I've also learned that the devastating truths can be the most important ones. And it's also okay to change, even to change permanently. It doesn't mean changing away from Jesus. I've served 7 total churches as a pastor, and I've visited hundreds more. And I've been told over and over and over and over, in ways ranging from outright hostility and harassment to mean faces and shushes and snickers, what we would call microaggressions, that, yeah, everyone is welcome here at church, in air quotes. We need to say that. That's the thing that we have to say. It's what Jesus would say. It's what the conference tells us we have to say, right? And it's on the sign that is outside the church. We paid a lot of money for it, so we kind of have to be consistent, right? But this church, it's just not built for Daniel. He's a child of God, and we love him. But there shouldn't be a but with that sentence, but oh boy, here come the buts. If he needs to go to church so bad, Natalie, go find another one. But then, that same year, 2024, that I left the church that I was serving and the town that I lived in because folks were so intolerant, I went to something else. I visited a very special continuing education event on a lark. I scooped together some continuing ed funds from my ARP account and decided, why not? Let's try it out. It was a conference I'd heard of on the internet. It was in Boston. It was called the National Conference for Racial Amity. It was an interfaith event. It wasn't hosted by Christians. It was hosted by members of the Baha'i faith. But, especially for those of y'all who know me better, you know that I adore interfaith ministries. In fact, I'm very passionate about them. And I've long believed that we can't possibly learn everything that there is to know about the body of God or about the divine or about what it is to live a holy life if we're not willing to learn from one another. We're simply closing off a good chunk of the library and not reading all the books that are over there if we don't do that. So enthusiastically, I saw this interfaith continuing ed event and I went. And I brought Daniel with me. Daniel was the only kid there, and in fact, I was nearly the youngest among the adults. And when I registered for the Racial Amity Conference, I told the folks that were running it that I was going to need to bring my developmentally disabled son. There was simply no way, because of the aforementioned separation anxiety, that I could be there for a whole weekend if I couldn't bring Daniel with me. And they were cool with that. They made the arrangements, they made the accommodations, and they welcomed him with open arms. Not a single dirty look, not a single complaint. In fact, several folks went out of their way to come up to us to introduce themselves to me and Daniel, and they told me how inspiring it was to see me and Daniel there together. One of the events at this conference was a night of dancing with a social justice-oriented hip-hop dance group. They call themselves the Floor Lords. And they led a party, and they passed out flags from countries around the world for folks to dance with. And they saw Daniel right at the beginning of their set wiggling happily to the music and clearly bubbling over with enthusiasm to get involved in whatever it was they were doing. And he didn't even really know. He just knew, I want to get myself in on that. And they knew right away that the best place for that energy was not banished from the room, not relegated out to the parking lot, but front and center, right on the dance floor in front of everybody as an example. And they gave him the flag for the Dominican Republic, and he was never happier to use his body and his voice in exactly the ways that felt natural to him. It was really a holy experience. He's never been more welcome anywhere than he was right there. Now, the next day was the keynote presentation. There were two speakers who were delivering a conversation together in front of all of us with a Q&A portion afterwards. And then there was a problem. Daniel, in his movement and curiosity, wandered. I had an eye on him. I knew he was safe. He wasn't going to leave the room, so I let him, because that's what's natural for Daniel to do, is just walk. There's no reason to stop him. But in that walking, in that wandering, he found the box on the wall that controls the volume for the microphones. And he got curious, because remember, Daniel is a kid that just really wants to get into everything, to touch everything with his hands, to see how everything works. And in that curiosity, in a blink, just in a moment that I wasn't paying quite as close attention, he turned one of the mics all the way up until everyone was hearing that really annoying microphone feedback screechy noise. Well, shit. So I got up, ran over to him, got him away from that corner, and while I was standing there next to that mic box on the wall, got ready for the moment that everyone would turn on me and Daniel, that moment that has happened so many times before. And why did she even bring him here? He's a little intruder on our turf. This place isn't built for him. Get out. Go watch this from your phone from the parking lot, lady. But no, that's not what happened. Do you know what did happen? No one gave a shit. They trusted me to take care of my kids' needs, and then they just moved on. And one of the keynote speakers, in fact, while I was still standing there in the corner with egg on my face, made a point of glancing my way and giving me a really friendly and compassionate smile so that I would know he wasn't offended, and it was going to be okay. Now, for those who happen to be curious, that particular keynote speaker, that one that gave me that really sweet smile, of all of the people in all the world, was none other than Penn Badgley, better known to some of you as Joe Goldberg from Netflix's You, that guy. But that's not the important detail in this story, because anybody could have done what Penn did. He showed radical hospitality, and I'm going to give Penn his flowers for it because he deserves it, and because we do need to lift up these examples when somebody isn't a red flag to a kid like Daniel, but instead they're a green flag, because we need to learn from them. But also, Penn was one of only dozens of folks who was a green flag that day, who did what he did. And I went home after that day not just learning a lot about racial amity, the topic that we came there to talk about, but also learning that it is entirely possible in the ministry to do things differently. There are people out there that are different, that have a different attitude. They don't recoil at a kid like Daniel. Guys, that is not just some automatic built-in reflex that we have to expect because it'll never be any other way. That is a learned behavior, and we can unlearn it. We can build an environment where we make gracious space for Daniel's missteps, for anyone's missteps, and where we embrace somebody's differences and enthusiasm instead of being afraid of them. It's totally possible. There is a different way to do this. And we can create spaces just like that here in New York, wherever you happen to live. And we can create spaces like that within Christianity, just like they already did in the Baha'i faith. And not only are we capable, we're obligated. If we claim to follow Jesus, this is the only way to live into his radical love ethic. Now, Jesus was the guy who did for others in his day what Penn did for me. Smiled lovingly at the one, the conspicuous one, the one whose differences drove them away from the community, the one who screwed up the mics by accident, the one, in air quotes, ruining the service by walking around too much, the one who's been relegated to the parking lot because he's too big and loud, or, in biblical terms, the one sheep who eloped from the fold. That's another of Daniel's behaviors, elopement. Now, the first time a therapist used that word, Sean and I looked at each other and then said, "Wait, you think he got married?" No. Eloping means to run away from a safe location. The to get married part is only implied. But Jesus is the shepherd who sees 99 sheep at church, together at coffee hour, perfectly happy chit-chatting about the weather and NASCAR, and he lets them keep doing that because they're fine. They don't need help right now. And he gives all of his attention to the one sheep who does need help, the one who wandered away, the sheep who's out in the parking lot watching the service from their phone. Or maybe the sheep who left because the others kicked him out. Or maybe the sheep who left because chit-chat and forced social niceties drive her up the wall. Or maybe because she can't stand having to make eye contact. Or the sheep who left because the sensory experience of church with the lights, the sounds, the people is too much for them. Or the sheep who left because his whole family wasn't welcome, only the family members who could pass for normal. Or the sheep whose creative mind was boxed in so hard that they couldn't tolerate another second of not being their true self. And of course, Jesus goes to find the sheep that we still can't admit we regularly push away from the church. The sheep of color, the queer sheep, the trans sheep. Now, why is Jesus giving all of his attention to just that one sheep? All sheep matter, the jealous sheep in the 99 might say. And it's what I've been told about Daniel. Why are you so concerned about Daniel's needs being met? Well, because I'm his mom. That's kind of literally my job. But Jesus has my back here. This is what followers of Christ do. We step away from the 99 and let them chill for a second because they're okay over there. And then we put our focus on the one who isn't okay, on the one who's lost the flock until we bring them back, until we're all together, because we're not whole without that one sheep. And it is so painful to be missing a piece, to be missing Daniel. We need to be united. This was my inspiration when I applied for grant funding to start a new faith community, when I started a church for Daniel. Now, to be clear, because it's easy to get confused, it is not my goal for this community to be an all-autistic community or an all-disabled community, because in my mind, that's also just a different kind of segregation. My goal here is inclusion. It's integration. It's finding Daniel out in the parking lot watching that one service on his phone and bringing him back inside. And as I sit here, low-key surrounded in my family by neuro-spicy folks of all different flavors, I personally don't have a neurodivergent diagnosis, but I also don't know that it's even possible that I'm actually neurotypical. pretty sure I'm not, but I also am not in a hurry to go get myself diagnosed with anything because I don't know what that would gain me anyway. But I'm also going to tell you, I don't in any way claim to speak for anybody besides myself. I don't represent autism or autism folks. I don't represent neurotypical folks. At the end of the day, I just represent me and my family. I'm a mom. I'm a minister. And I want to create a sacred space where my whole family is actually welcome. Not just in theory, but in practice. When I applied for the grant funding, I did some research, and the numbers are not encouraging. In 2020, Lifeway Research reported that families with an autistic loved one are twice as likely as their neurotypical counterparts to not go to church. Meanwhile, just this year in 2025, research conducted by an international Christian ministry called Joni and Friends suggested that even among very devout families, a full 80% of us who have a disabled loved one have no relationship with a church family. Not because we don't long for it, and certainly not because we don't care. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's because we care so much. And the rejection that we've experienced from the faith families we've tried to join has been a death by 1,000 cuts. We try and try and try and try. But after enough times of being sneered at, being gawked at, being asked to not come back, being made to watch the service from our car, we just give up. And we just stop going. We have a giant stack of challenges in front of us every single day that you may never even think about. And we just don't have the time or the bandwidth left to keep pushing a boulder up the hill like we're Sisyphus. A Church for Daniel is a place where we're going to stop doing this to families and individuals. We're going to get rid of the boulder and we're going to get rid of the hill. And while we're at it, the sneers and the shushes and the angry eyes and the harassing neighbors. And if we see a Daniel among us, full of life, full of radiance and unable to hold it back, wanting to let it out, we're going to hand him a flag for the Dominican Republic and tell him to go lead the dance. So the first Sunday of every month, we're going to have a Church for Daniel in person at the church that I'm serving right now, which is Honeoye Falls United Methodist Church just outside of Rochester, New York. But I quickly discovered when I started this journey that a lot of us don't live near one another. We don't have the bandwidth left to go to a place and do a thing. For all the reasons that I've rattled off earlier in this podcast, and for reasons that I probably couldn't think of because they're so personal to you. Some of us just don't plain have schedules that allow us to carve out an hour. A Church for Daniel won't reach that one sheep. The autistic sheep stuck in the parking lot. If a Church for Daniel is confined to just one place, my congregation, at just one set time. Hence, a social media presence, both on Facebook and Instagram. Please come look us up. And a podcast, this one, that you can engage whenever you want, whenever you're able, wherever you are today, in all senses. So, maybe you're like my son Daniel. Maybe you are like 1 out of every 30 of his peers, and maybe you too are autistic. Or maybe you have a different neurodivergent diagnosis, ADHD, IDD, OCD, dyslexia, just to name a few. If so, welcome. But maybe you're like Daniel in other ways. Maybe sitting in hard wooden pews, only standing when the little asterisk in the bulletin indicates it's time for that, only speaking when the bold typeface in the bulletin tells you what to say, is far too restrictive for your soul. Maybe you're like me, and church has felt like death by 1,000 cuts. And at this point, you need to see this whole thing either change for real or die for real. Maybe, like Daniel, you're a singer and a dancer. Or maybe, like my husband, you never want to get stuck making small talk with an old lady ever again. You want to sit in the corner and color and be left alone, but still be welcome to absorb whatever you're going to absorb in the space. Maybe you're like my other son. You want to give everybody a hug because everyone needs a hug. Maybe you're like my daughter and you want to get in on all the action for yourself, not just watch from the sidelines. Or maybe you're like my parents, listening to this podcast from Chicago, trying to find something that speaks to you. And if so, hi, Mom and Dad. My name is Natalie, and this is a church for Daniel. It's a church for anyone like Daniel, and anyone who could stand to learn from Daniel, which is everyone. It's a church for everyone, and it's a church for you, and I'm glad you're here.